このナインを連載している足立満という漫画家。面白い漫画を描いてるはずなのに、今一つ人気が出んな。
Adachi Mitsuru is one of the most well-known and acclaimed mangaka in Japan, with a career spanning all the way to the early 70s. While he has released a variety of stories over his long career, he is most known for his high school rom-coms which revolve around sports. He and his works are household names due to the sheer popularity and sale of his manga, as well as the numerous adaptations of his stories in anime and live action. Along with that mainstream success, he has garnered respect from his contemporaries like Rumiko Takahashi, and touted as one of the great and influential artists in the industry. Despite these accomplishments, I wouldn't be surprised if a good amount of you watching this have never heard of him. This is because in the larger English-speaking world, he has remained relatively obscure. This is likely due to the fact that out of his extensive career, only 2 of his works have been published in English. This leaves most of his major works, especially his most popular and acclaimed one, Touch, having never had the chance to be promoted in the English market. In comparison, the aforementioned Takahashi has had all her major works published in English, while their adaptations are staples in the Western anime fandom. So Adachi, despite being a big name in his home country, has had little chance to try and attain similar success in the English anime and manga community. In this video, I would like to convince you to give his works a chance, as he is my favorite mangaka, and believe his works deserve more eyes on them from people outside of Japan. First off, I'd like to show you a few pages from his works to give you an idea of what you can expect. I also think these pages highlight his general approach to storytelling. This page comes from the first chapter of his 2001 series Katsu. While it appears to be a simple funny event that may have given you a little chuckle, broken down it's very well constructed. For one, each panel is significant and carrying the payoff at the end. If you skip or just glaze over any of them, the payoff on the final panel is lost. Like with the first panel, showing you how many items she is carrying so you know which item is missing from the ones caught in the smaller set of panels. Alternatively, you can see how each panel by itself doesn't show much, or its relevance isn't made apparent until the last panel to give context. Now, let's look at a couple of pages from the end of his first chapter of Touch. Here, designed to characterize and contrast the 3 main characters introduced in this chapter. The panels on the first page show off Katsuya's and Minami's popularity and academic achievements, showing them adored by people, close-ups to highlight their beautiful and handsome features, and some smaller panels to show their spot in the academic rankings. The next page we anticipate seeing Tatsuya, but it trails off from the rankings to him alone in a classroom on cleanup duty. This juxtaposition between the panels shown in the first and second page brings all the details to a funny punchline and a great way to contrast the characters. These short and simple scenes show how Adachi uses a careful setup of details to lead to a comedic payoff. However, this approach isn't just used for isolated scenes or comedy. In many of his short stories and series chapters, there is a mystery, or they contain scenes that are unclear as to their point. But when you read to the end, he will bring it all to a satisfying conclusion. And of course, this approach is seen in the larger plot of his serialized stories as well. Adachi often strings readers along with small details that lead to important events or reveals later on. Going back to the first page I showed from Katsu, this scene is actually called back to in similar scenes, used to convey that a character has good reflexes like a boxer, cluing you into their past or possible future. So even simple pages you may take as a one-off joke will be referenced to convey something about the plot or characters. He will also employ foreshadowing, like characters contemplating on certain details that allude to future developments. Adachi is very committed to slowly doling out information in his stories and never being too straightforward about them, all to keep the readers guessing on what will happen next. And that's because the best way he utilizes this slow burn approach is when he does it to subvert the expectations of the readers. Many times in his stories, he will build up certain events or character motivations, at times in a way that is cliché. He will then subvert those expectations or recontextualize your understanding of the events prior. He will do this for comedic effect, to reframe your understanding of a character and their goals, and probably his most iconic use of this, creating some of the best twists you would never expect to see in a seemingly simple rom-com or high school sports story. These moments can radically change your perception of what story Adachi has been telling and what will happen going forward. None of these twists are ever forced, as once you see where Adachi is taking the plot and characters, it feels completely natural in hindsight, and is one of the reasons that I keep revisiting his works, as the purpose of these moments can be better appreciated. Needless to say, I won't be spoiling any of them here, but just know that Adachi will continue to play with your assumptions of his stories. Now that we've covered his general approach to storytelling, Let me tell you about more specific aspects of his stories. Starting off with his comedy. As you've seen from the pages I showed, Adachi's style of comedy relies on comedic setup and payoff. His jokes tend to come with the comedic timing that he creates naturally from the scene. Not many rom-com manga do this. Instead, they rely on having ridiculous situations with over-the-top reactions from the characters. Adachi's characters are much more subdued with their reactions, with the exception being those that are meant to be the butt of the joke. And Adachi can create comedy from any type of situation, and often you don't know when he's setting up for a joke until you get to the punchline. Though probably my favorite type of comedy he does is his fourth wall breaks, and these can vary in so many ways, from characters complaining about the story, to panels being interacted with, to blatant shilling of his other works, but what always gets me laughing is anything involving Adachi's self-insert character. This character will praise himself, complain about deadlines and editors, interact directly with the actual characters, and much more. My personal favorite is when he's addressing mistakes he made in his stories, where his self-insert is either apologetic about them or actively refuses to admit that he made any such mistake. These fourth wall breaks are, in my opinion, his most consistently creative comedic bit. Overall, while I don't laugh as hard from his works compared to other rom-coms, it's this knack for comedic setup rather than relying on wacky situations that makes Adachi a refreshing and fun author to read. Now let's talk about Adachi's dialogue. I don't think I'm exaggerating in saying that Adachi is one of the best at constructing great dialogue in manga, especially in the genre of romantic comedies, which are plagued with extremely cheesy, repetitive, and cliché dialogue. For starters, Adachi's dialogue is always straight to the point. The information given is succinct, and he gives you just enough for you to fill in the gaps of what he's not showing or telling you explicitly. Take the start of this chapter from H2, where two characters, Hiro and Hikari, who due to various circumstances have to take shelter in a motel. You have short narration in the first page summing up their situation, then following up the last piece of narration, we cut to the next page already in the motel, but with Hiro calling Hikari his sister, something we know isn't true. Right away, we can imagine how they plan to check in based on the implications set from the dialogue. Adachi leaves a lot unsaid, trusting you to get what he's trying to communicate implicitly. On the same chapter, Hiro goes to take a bath in the motel, and bumps into his teammate Kine, both coincidentally coming from the same concert. But when Kine asks who Hiro went with, he lies saying he went with his guy friend. There's no extra dialogue to explain why. If you know the context behind Hikari and Hiro's relationship, you'll know why he felt he had to lie. This is just more efficient and engaging dialogue, compared to a lot of rom-coms that seem like they have to over-explain and show everything to the reader. However, the greatest quality of Adachi's dialogue is just how natural and down-to-earth it feels, while being dense with character and emotion. You can see this when longtime friends are talking to each other. He can convey the trust, warmness, and playfulness developed from years together, all through great lines back and forth between them. When characters lament or reminisce about the past, the weight of their experiences can be felt through simple choice lines. And of course, feelings of romance and affection are conveyed wonderfully, without cheesiness or cliché. There's many lines throughout his stories that have just stuck in my mind, with just how perfect they were in encapsulating the emotions of the scenes they were in. Probably Adachi's most powerful storytelling technique is his use of silent panels. Scenes where there's no dialogue at all are Adachi's most cinematic, as they slow down time for the reader to take in the significance of the scene. His use of silent panels are varied, ranging from building tension before a big game, a quiet contemplative scene with a character, or to convey the aftermath of life-changing events. These are some of the most impactful pages that stick in your mind when you think back to these stories because of how well they draw you in. It is in Adachi's incorporation of his brilliant dialogue and impactful silent panels that make him a cut above most manga artists. Manga, being a part of the broader medium of sequential art, can be stripped down to text and images, and it's the mark of an expert in this craft to be able to use these elements together as effectively as possible, which is a skill Adachi has honed over a 4-decade-long career. In his earlier works, you would see him rely heavily on dialogue and narration to tell his stories, with images being there as almost an accessory. Over the course of his career, he's found ways to have them complement each other, where neither one alone can communicate what Adachi is going for. You can see this simply from the expressions of characters giving an air of sarcasm to their lines, or more subtly from how he intentionally hides expressions of the characters to make the line feel heavier or open to interpretation. In normal dialogue, he will insert a silent panel of a character in between lines to provide a natural flow in the conversation and to show a character giving pause to think about the words being said. Adachi used to rely on internal monologuing to convey a character's mental state, but over the years has relegated it to very specific moments. He now always shows emotion through action, and oftentimes this is in contrast to what a character may be saying, showing the conflict within them. It's crazy how effortlessly Adachi blends these elements together in many scenes and over hundreds of chapters, while many other mangaka are stuck on that similar phase early on in his career, over relying on either dialogue or images to tell their story. And more than anything, this is the main reason I think people should give Adachi a shot. Even if you're not a fan of rom-coms or high school sports stories, Adachi can be appreciated from the mastery of his medium and being one of the most effective storytellers in the industry. I could continue to ramble on about his works and career, as I haven't even mentioned his artwork, his impeccable flow, the themes he touches on, his depiction of sports, his romance, and so much more. I plan to do so in the future, and this video could be the first step in generating interest. But all in all, I hope I have conveyed to you why Adachi Mitsuru is worth checking out. Let me know your thoughts if you decided to do that, or if you're already an Adachi fan. Thanks for watching.